Good afternoon. My name's Ray Katz. I'm Collegiate Sports Management Group's Chief Operating Officer, and part of our organization is EsportsU. We are very, very excited to be discussing this panel today with some of the true leaders and visionaries of college esports. We have first Commissioner Dan Coonan of the ECAC. Dan's done an absolutely incredible job over the past 6 years building ECAC into the leading esports association, passing 200 members this year. I'm sorry. We have Bob Drainoff, retired commissioner of the ECC, really one of the first commissioners to take the lead in esports and recognize its value in getting ahead of this current enrollment crisis. Cora Kennedy, Illinois Wesleyan University's director of esports, and Chase Newcomb, Shenandoah, professor of esports. So I'm going to go around the room and let's have everybody do a brief introduction of themselves. Let's kind of go in that order. Start with Dan, Bob, Cora, and Chase, and just kind of hit this really great group of audience with some of your thoughts, how you got into esports, what you see the role of esports is, and what you kind of see just big picture as how esports may be a solution to the enrollment cliff, which I will dig into, but just kind of give maybe a brief introduction of yourself, and then we'll dig into all those subjects in more detail. So let's kick it off with Dan.
Sure. Dan Coonan, commissioner of the ECAC. I came from college athletics, traditional sports. I was an assistant commissioner at the Pac-12. I, for 12 years, was athletic director at Santa Clara. I came back here to do this 8 years ago. We had a couple hundred schools, D1, 2, and 3 for traditional sports. It was suggested to me that we might be a good home for esports as well, and so we dove in, and we've just been rolling ever since. And we partnered with CSMG and made a few other uh, good moves, and now we'll probably have 230 schools this year, 1,600 teams nationwide. We're running 21 games. We'll have several events. We're broadcasting several nights a week, and it's been a really cool thing. And and I absolutely, it helps with enrollment. It helps with male enrollment and STEM, the type of students that a lot of these schools are interested in, and that in some cases that's a primary motivation to go in big on esports.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bob, what's your perspective? You've done a lot of amazing things in college athletics, and then the last several years joining the sort of pioneer group of collegiate esports.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Yeah, Bob Dranoff. As it says there, I recently retired after 16 years as the commissioner of the East Coast Conference, NCAA Division II, and about 45 years in college athletics as an AD and other administrative roles. While at the ECC, we're one of the first traditional conferences to begin offering league and championship play in esports. And the conference grew from 4 in the first year to now, I guess, about 6 years later, we have 15 or 16 schools playing with us. And similar to what Dan said, is that our schools, which are all the schools most of the schools that play with us are NCAA D2. We have a few D3s in there too, but esports was a response to the need to do what we could to offer opportunities to students and to help our schools recruit. And that's, in my mind, a big part of what our mission is, doing what we can to assist our schools to be viable, and athletics and esports are a big part of that.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's go to Cora. Again, the director of IWU Esports, a school that holds a special place in my heart. My nephew competed there in golf and won a national championship in D3 with the school in 2019. I was also able to help pull the school into the ECAC under the prior administration, but Cora's taken the program to another level. So great job. And Cora, let's hear from you.
So, like I said, hi, I'm Cora. I am the director of esports at Illinois Wesleyan. Prior to my time being here, I was a high school teacher about an hour south of here at Glenwood High School. There, I was the founder of the high school esports program there, as well as one of the founders of the Illinois High School Esports Association. And with the IHSCA, I was caster, director, administrator, student mentor, all these 20 things, and I've been there, done that for most aspects in esports. I used to compete in esports personally. I played independently for Rainbow Six Siege, and beyond that, I also am currently the director of esports for the Aurora series. I run a group that is dedicated to creating marginalized gender competition in collegiate esports through both Valorant and now Overwatch this year. I have a staff of about 45 students and about 4 or 5 adult staff, I guess, who help us run the whole place. And it's an organization dedicated to really doing right by a very marginalized community in esports. Outside of that, I'm a writer, speaker, photographer, you name it, I've probably done it. And I travel around just making sure that I can do the best for the folks I work with.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Chase Newcomb, Shenandoah professor of esports. I'm particularly interested in esports curriculum and how that relates to competitive esports and your overall background, Chase. So I'm excited to hear from you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm stoked to be here. My name's Chase Newcomb. As you said, I'm an esports professor here at Shenandoah University, but I've worn many hats in this industry. EsportsU, if you want to know a little bit more about me, just put out a video about Ball State. specifically winning Rocket League at the most recent CECC Nationals. Why that's relevant, I started the club program at Ball State as an undergraduate student from 2019 to 2015 to 2018. I've held many hats since becoming a full-time professional in the industry. I was the chair of the advisory board for NECC for a few years, and I just finished my tenure as chair of the competition council over at NACE for the past couple of years. So been around, done a lot. Like Cora, I wear many hats in the space, and the most recent hat I've put on is professor. So right before we sat down and we're talking about this, I was literally writing the curriculum for next week. Final stuff, of course, not anything that's going to be up and coming in the next week, but really excited to dig our heels in and create some really awesome change here.
Awesome. Great to hear from you. So today our topic is about esports and enrollment. And this is a topic that is mentioned and discussed quite a bit, but not so much in the general public. There are a lot of sentiments and very specific statistics that I'll just touch on that really indicate that U.S. colleges are on the edge of an enrollment cliff as the number of 18 and 19-year-olds declines over the past several years. To get a little more specific on that topic, the number is going down quite substantially from 4.5 way under 3, or to I should say around 3.5 million. And this is going to create a challenge for many colleges and universities. We've already seen several schools, and I think Bob can attest to that, several schools that have gone out of business. A lot of schools have had declining enrollment. And Illinois Wesleyan in particular has been very effective in terms of using both sports and esports to help enrollment turn around. And I think that's why you're seeing so much more of a commitment to sports at the Division I, power, and just mid-majors, Division II, and Division III schools, because it's a great enrollment vehicle. Specifically in traditional sports, lacrosse has been very, very effective as something that's proliferated quite a bit. So with that in mind, let's kind of start with Dan and Bob in terms of what you've seen and any specifics that you've seen across your various memberships or the great breadth of relationships. Let's start with Dan real quick. Dan, you there? Bob, can you hear us?
Yeah,
let's start with Bob.
I'll jump in and
please.
I think this enrollment clip that you're talking about is a real thing. I think as the demographics change, the ages of traditional college students is changing, along with a changing philosophy about higher education as a whole in many areas. That what was seen as a given, that students would go further and get their bachelor's degree because that was what was going to lead to a job, is not held as strongly by many. And so, I think, as I was saying earlier, and as you mentioned with the program that Cora is running and the programs that Chase has run, the idea of being able to offer something that's of great interest to a population that that schools want. Again, whether traditional or non-traditional age students, schools need enrollment. An example of my former conference, East Coast Conference in the Northeast, like a lot of other areas, our conference is a combination of public and private institutions, but a lot of them are small schools. And Ray, you alluded. I'm in a conference and in a region where we've lost several schools that closed. At one point this summer, I was reading stats that were showing that a school was closing about once a week. A lot of them were smaller private, perhaps real niche type schools. A lot of them were faith-based schools, but it's an expensive thing to keep a institution of higher education going. So again, it goes back to what can we do to try to be creative and innovative and do things to bring programs in. And I think about what you were saying about Corin listening to the size of her program, which she's built. Chase beginning or developing a major in esports gaming, things like that, because in my mind, I teach sports management on the graduate level, and that to me, those kind of programs are going to be the future. Honestly, hey, kids need jobs, and that's a great reason to go to to Shenandoah now too. So.
Yeah, there's no question. New England, sort of the area, and then the Middle Atlantic. Um, the number of 18-year-olds down about 20% specifically, pretty flat from 2012 to 2020, and then declining really rapidly from 25 to 28, so that the number will be 80% of the prior high. So really interesting, especially in this part of the country. Dan, are you back? All right, let's proceed then to Cora. Cora, you've
And actually, yeah, go ahead.
please. No, what were you going to say?
So talking about the enrollment cliff, we had actually a lot of conversations here at Wesleyan about it, and from an administrative perspective,
Yep.
because looking at the root causes, what happened 18 years ago was the 2008 recession. And the root cause of a lot of the enrollment crisis right now is people were not having as many children due to the cost of living crisis happening in 2008, 2009. So a lot of our causes of this enrollment decline is not just a cultural shift, but it's a lack of people. And you can't make up and just create people out of nowhere. So the big issue right now comes from an issue of number of people. So the reason schools are diversifying into tons of other sports, like Wesleyan has added tumbling and wrestling in recent years. And schools are focusing more on athletics and other reasons to bring students to schools, because being just a traditional academics program is no longer enough to bring students in from an ever dwindling pool. Private schools suffer this more than public schools. I know big state schools don't have an issue with enrollment really because they always have a record number of applicants. But with a smaller school like ours, the focus really is on what can we do to bring them here. And for example, Wesleyan is now half athletes. We have roughly 52% this year as athletes, and our incoming class is 56%. So the class really comes down to how can we find students who want to do something, because as we've seen furthermore in studies and all these ways that schools approach things, school and college is no longer a place where someone's life starts. Because traditionally, when school, going back the years, that's where you met your social groups, that's where you found your interests, that's where you do all these things. But students are so much more diversified coming into school now that school is a step in their life, not just the start of their life. So we have to find other ways to interest them, which is why esports comes into play, or initiatives that not only bring students in for enrollment, but also retain them. Retention is a huge thing in esports and college recruiting in general, because enrollment numbers look great, but if your dropout rate is heinous, it doesn't go anywhere. So you have to look at how you can retain students through the programs you're offering on campus, services, and ways for students to find that the school they're going to is their home.
So Cora, to build on that, it's often been said in sports that the biggest donors, the bigger donors, tend to have been athletes. Do you see that? I know that's the case at IWU. I'm a donor there, so I'm not a graduate, but my nephew is. However, do you see the same thing happening in esports, or is it too early to tell if that trend's going to translate?
In my perspective, it's a bit too early, because my first graduates from this program who were in it as a recruited player graduated in 2021. They're not in a stable enough spot as a person to start donating to the university in a meaningful, sizable quantity. What I found instead is actually board members who are philanthropists focused on STEM or technology, or folks who want to be in a more tech-centric sphere see esports and computer-related things like project car teams and that kind of thing as a way to find a workforce that really gets involved. An example of this is schools like engineering schools who run project teams. They almost very heavily recruit for big companies from those because they have all these practical experiences and they get donations from doing that. Well, esports the same way. My biggest donors as a program come from the board level, because there's a board member who's also a philanthropist involved in STEM and wants to see more technology-centric things coming out of it. So it's not really esports focused necessarily from donors' perspective. It's more about the technology and the workforce it creates.
Yeah, that's actually a great point because we've seen that esports has brought more STEM students into these schools as well. So the fit there is terrific. And last thing, Cora, do you think IWU is a good benchmark for schools of similar sizes, nature, and geography?
Yeah, I think it is. I actually was talking with admissions recently because we're doing a lot of recruiting comparisons, and I'm looking at, they call them comparison institutions. It's schools that are similar size, geometry, that kind of thing. And we're a good benchmark for that, I think, because the school has looked to the future and taken to it rigorously. We have a growing athletics population with growing support. As a campus, we're working on creating vibrant spaces that also partner with athletics. We are creating STEM spaces like the Idea Center. And as a school, it's really geared towards doing what students want. In the end, I think college and anyone who works in higher education should be geared towards doing what students want and making sure that they're happy. Because I'm not here to be customer service, but I'm here because I like the students. I'm in higher ed and I'm involved in education because I like helping others. And so I think if any school listens to students enough to add sports like Wesleyan has, or add esports, or construct buildings, or bring new programs in, they're on a better path than most.
Absolutely brilliant. Chase, you've been not only a follower of EsportsU and CECC for years, but you've been first a club director, student director, and director of multiple schools, and now a professor. What have you observed in your career in terms of evolution in collegiate esports education, and then finally the impact of all of this on enrollment?
Wow, so that's a great question. A little loaded, and I'll do my best to be concise. So, I think the first thing that I might draw attention to is how programs develop over the course of multiple leadership roles or multiple leaders coming into the role. You were talking about Illinois Wesleyan being a benchmark. I think it's not only a benchmark for the reasons that Cora outlined, but because now it has been through multiple iterations of leadership and stood the test of time for that. For some programs, there's because we're still in the wild west of esports in some senses. One of those senses is documentation. So I think it's very important that directors that come and go out of their roles set the program up for success when they leave the program, and they leave the program during a time that's not going to be critical for the program's success, like leaving mid-semester or leaving just willy-nilly out of the year because of a job opportunity. And that's partially due to the volatility currently in the market of people not understanding how the ebb and flow of esports within higher education works. I've gotten multiple offers mid-semester to go to another institution, other institutions that I really wanted to work at, but my ethical code wouldn't allow me to do so because I really wanted to see the students grow, and in turn, the students recognize and see that as well. So going back into that retention piece, I think that's one of the biggest pieces in esports that we need to be focusing on as educators and leaders to ensure that the students that are coming in, we're keeping in. We might not, to Cora's point, be able to increase that enrollment rate at the current moment. So you have to look around and say, entrepreneurially, what can we do to affect the students that are within our close proximity? And that key goal, I think, should be retainment of those students. And making sure that they are well cared for. The one thing that I would say, going from St. Ambrose, which is an NAIA school, to St. Cloud State, which is a D2, D1 school, now over to Shenandoah, is I've seen so many different focuses on different developmental parts of esports. And I think as an industry, we're still figuring out what that development looks like. And it's programs like Illinois Wesleyan that are really setting that ground footing for years to come on what that private school model will look like. So I think this is a great panel for having all these different founders and educators in the space that have been involved from multifaceted approaches. I might end on and say that I think the most important thing when we're looking at enrollment in the next few years is being one-on-one driven with student development. I see too many professors that are like, I have 100 students under my belt, I can't cater to everyone. And those days are pretty much gone. We have to be one-on-one in our engagement and our because that will all affect, like I was saying earlier, our retention. Not only will it affect that, it will affect students' passion to want to get into esports. it's also important that we don't just hyper focus on just esports. One of the things that I'm teaching in my 101 courses is we're having discussion boards on reflectively thinking on how you can apply your skill set that you're learning in esports to other industries, so that we're not just a success story that's self-contained, but we're a success story that is utilized in other industries as well.
No, that's great insight. Look, it's at CSMG. I think we've learned when have put the CECC event series together, a lot of good stuff we've taken from our backgrounds in traditional sports and combined those with the amazing backgrounds our leadership in the esports side has. Um, what advice would you have for us in terms of how we can really be a better industry thought leader and support these schools, private schools and smaller schools? Because clearly we're a big believer that esports is a huge benefit to schools like this. And we also believe that while the Power Five schools are going to have a role in this, they'll never supplant the importance of esports to this sort of private school ecosystem.
So I might give two recommendations. The first recommendation is my base recommendation that I always give anyone being a grassroots-oriented leader: just get involved. So I was lucky enough to meet Dan a few years ago at HV GamerCon, which was a esports vanguard, a vanguard initiative that we went out to in partnership with ECAC, and I was doing photography at that event. And just watching him get out and meet the competitors on the floor and get to know people, trust me, coming from a student perspective, students are going to remember that interaction for years to come. So really being that inspiring leader that you can, and organizing your community and being involved with that, I think, is a very crucial piece. Something that I guess is more straightforward that I would recommend is more online events that give students opportunities intermittently throughout the year to get involved, rather than just the LAN events. Because the LAN events, y'all have already set the tone, you've set the stage. We see student involvement and engagement in that all the time, and that's phenomenal, but those are few and far between. So hosting more of those online interactions to allow students to break out their chops in commentary and production, do things like the wonderful Professor Layton is currently doing on the back end right now for this presentation, I think is invaluable for engagement within the space, and it creates that more frequent benchmark that you can set in between those LAN events. So that would be my recommendation, I think.
Yeah, Chase, I think that's great advice. And we have three academics here at CSMG. So I think we can really create some good dialogue and discourse about this. Let's go back to you, Dan, in terms of your perspective as to the important role of esports and how you see this evolving across a broad range of schools that are within your 225 plus membership.
Yeah, we see only increasing movement into this and expanding programs within our footprint, and there, we're well past the COVID thing now, and after COVID, we have been very much online. Our online tournaments were everything, but now we're getting involved in more. We're going to do another high end in-person event in up by Albany and Troy again, and we're going to do individual events at various schools as well, and we're offering more and more titles each year, because there's more and more interest across the board each year in titles. So and the other thing is, we now see we have entire conferences, traditional conferences, coming to us to have us do their esports, which is pretty cool. So we'll do their esports for them and for whatever titles they want. But for all the other titles, they fold right into ECAC esports, and that's been working out well for us as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'd love to circle back to you on, Dan, because that's a great answer, is what do you see as some of the parallels and differences? Cora was talking about over 50% of Illinois Wesleyan's incoming students are athletes, and then you layer on the student esports athletes or athletes, whatever you want to call them, which is great. what do you see as the parallels and what esports can learn from sports in terms of being a key enrollment vehicle, ultimately a key development vehicle, and sort of how does that all vary as you've been part of everything from Power Five D1 to mid major D1 and all the way down the line in terms of your world and contacts. How would you assess all that?
Well, I think it can happen overnight. It can be so quick. I mean, it's simply on admitted students night. If there is a table or two devoted to esports, that absolutely will make a number of those students commit to the school. And you don't really see that with volleyball or some of the others. It just takes time. It's a recruiting process, and all sorts of things go into that. This is much more instantaneous, and there's a lot that can be done by schools that really want to stimulate growth in using their esports program to bring it about, which I think is really really cool. And it can be controversial because the minute you throw out an esports corner of a room like that on an admitted students night, it's going to be swamped and it will detract from some of the other pet programs that people want to see the school succeed in, and it can be embarrassing in that sense. But unquestionably, it makes a difference.
What can the ECAC do, and why should more and more schools continue to drive your amazing membership growth? What are some of the things that you're thinking moving forward that can really be a valuable resource and a valuable insight driver for some of these schools?
Right. Well, like I said recently, we're really leaning into conference competition within a conference. So a traditional conference will come to us, but they may only have two or three sports that they all play together, and we'll run that competition for them, and we will have a championship for them, and it'll be a great experience, and we'll have a website for them where people can track their standings. But for all the other sports, all the other 18 or so that they don't necessarily want to have a conference championship for and conference competition, they can just fold right into our ECAC esports and climb up the ladder and get into playoffs, and then hopefully seek a spot at your national championship tournament, the CECC, and that's been great. It really has been, and the programs that start with us, inevitably they are adding to their rosters. And so now our average team has between 30 and 40 on their rosters. And a lot of those started out with just one or two teams. And so that kind of growth is great, especially for all these schools that are so laser focused on getting growth and enrollment. It works out great for them.
No, that's tremendous. Um, let's just stay with you, Dan, and then kind of work back around the room. What do you see as 5 years from now? What does this look like? What does it look like in terms of CECC? And then what are some of the things in terms of leading up to the CECC that the whole ecosystem of collegiate esports will get both broader and also deeper? 2029,
Yes,
2029, 2030 academic year, what does this look like?
Yeah, so I think you have an even more sophisticated array of esports schools out there. Every year, the ones that are just starting, within a couple of years, they get sophisticated, and over the course of 5 years, it's going to be so many more of that, and we keep adding schools every year, and I see no stopping of that. It seems like we're going to add 30 to 50 schools or more a year, um, and um, and I think we're going to start seeing more in-person events. People will get back to that, but it won't. I don't think it'll be mandatory because there still are going to be a lot of schools that just don't have the budget to travel or want to undertake the liability. And so it's on us to accommodate all of that, and do it in the best possible way. And like as I mentioned, I do think these conferences, now that esports is so widespread, every conference has it. It makes sense for conferences to try to do it themselves, but they can partner with us and others to do it for them, and so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. And it's, you get economies of scale, and that can be a pretty attractive alternative, and it enables schools that don't participate in, or that participate in more than just the conference offerings, to participate in everything else that we offer, all 21 of our sports. So I think all of that is on the landscape in the next 5 years. I don't see the NCAA jumping into it, um, and some of the great optimistic view of what esports was going to be years ago has been tempered, and so it'll be interesting to see what new organizations try to dive in, and I'm sure there will be, um, but but there's a lot of programs that are already well down a path and doing some pretty good things for their members and getting great feedback, and those are tough to compete with.
No, that's tremendous stuff, Dan. Bob, what would you add to that in terms of not just your overall prognostication as to what the 29-30 collegiate esports season looks like, but how you see the NCAA addressing this, and then how you address the question when people say, well, esports really isn't all it's cracked up to be, because when I give the answer, I always say it's sort of like, and most of the viewers here are going to be too young to remember this, and probably even Cora and Chase, but to me, pro esports was like the internet bubble right before 2000, and collegiate esports is the real internet getting built bottom up in a meaningful way after 2000. So, love to hear your perspective on all that, Bob, and then we'll get back to Cora and Chase.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll tell you that if I was starting an esports program and I had a lot of money, I'd be going to Cora and Chase first, because I think these two know exactly what's going on compared to an old guy like me. But I think that I do agree with Dan that I don't see the NCAA really getting involved, but I wouldn't have thought the NCAA would get involved in flag football, and that's a big thing that is on the future, on the horizon for the NCAA. I think they're in the same boat. Hey, Ray, we were talking about this earlier. College athletics has changed so significantly in such a short amount of time, and it's going to keep changing. But I'm going to go back to something that you had asked before. I think to Dan is what could esports learn from college athletics, and I always am a little hesitant on that, because I don't know that they should follow the lead there altogether. But what I think, in my opinion, looking at the schools that have participated with us and the people I've gotten to know, one of the biggest things is that what schools need to do is, if they're going to have esports, they need to make a commitment to it, and not just go back to what Chase says, where you have a coach or an advisor or a director who leaves halfway through the year because they're getting paid minimum wage, and now they could get a real job. The schools say they want esports, but they don't always make that commitment. And a part of that is not just to that individual that leads the program, but then again, with what Cora was saying, is it becomes a cultural thing. I think that if you want to show these students that what students want is not just to go to school, go to classes, and then go get a job. They want to be part of something. And so schools also have to realize that it's a total experience. So let's treat them like we're treating everybody else, all the other athletes, all the other students that are involved on campus. Let's and I guess in my mind, one of the big parts of that is, in the whole scheme of things, it's an investment for equipment and perhaps for a facility, and then for some staff. But compared to some major athletic programs, you could get a lot done with a relatively small investment that could last for a long time. And that goes back to the reason where I think that esports will continue to grow, because you're not just getting high level baseball players that happen to be academically qualified for your school. You could get a large array of students that are interested in a lot of things on campus, but that also are seeking out the esports program because that's going to be a big part of their life. And that leads to those, hopefully, the future donations that Cora is going to get her former esports athletes to give back to the school, because they're going to come back and say, this was one of the biggest and most important parts of my life, is that team and those people that I met and were able to play with. So last thing I'll say is, so all that together, that commitment part, the belief that this means something, and for that reason, I'm not going to lie, that might be an esports program might be better housed not in the athletic program, but maybe somewhere else on campus sometimes, depending on who's leading that athletic program. I could tell you from personal experience. But the other thing is, how do you help the school build their brand and their involvement in the community? Because I think part of recruiting future athletes, and all the programs in my conference need to learn how to recruit, not just put up a flyer in the cafeteria and expect people to, walk down to the room to try out or to say I want to play. But how do you start building the relationships with the high school programs, with the youth programs, with some of these growing businesses in the community that are developing land centers and things like that? How could you be part of the community? Because that's going to lead to recruitment and lead to better business and overall growth and jobs. And people, like the kids that study at Shenandoah, that Chase is going to be able to go place in positions around the country. It all comes together.
Now that's great stuff. Let's go to you, Chase. Where do you see this going in 5 years, and what's your position going to be in this?
Oh man, such a
Not to put you
loaded
on the
question,
spot or
Ray.
anything like that.
No, you're totally fine. It's I've been sitting here listening to Bob and Dan talk, and Bob I agree with in a lot of ways, and my answer is actually similar to his. I think in 5 years we're going to see the dust settle a little bit. And right now we're seeing a lot of schools that want to invest in esports because it's the new popular buzzword. And in the topic of enrollment, it is an enrollment catcher. It gets a lot of students that want to get involved now in higher education. So I think we'll see the dust settle, and rather than programs or schools going to the cafeteria and seeing meal one esports and then going, oh, I'll just have the number one, they're going to see an a la carte option of what is available to them. So you can invest in an esports competitive program, or you can invest in academia and having curriculum in your esports program, or you can invest in building a community. It won't be at that point just a one-stop shop where you have folks like Cora and I that are then having one person doing 17 different roles because that's what the school wants. I think in the next 5 years, we'll start to see, to Dan's point earlier, some of these schools take a step back and go, whoa, we were in over our heads, but we didn't make the investments that we should have made when building a pseudo department in and of itself. So in 5 years, that's what I would like to see. I would like to see the industry settle a little bit and see more of those specific roles come out, because I'm a big believer that culture is shaped by what you put in academia, because academia is a requirement and its own subculture within our own history of people. Ray, Dan, Bob, I'm sure all of you can think back to your college days very fondly of the people that you met in those time periods and the people that you've developed with now throughout your whole life. And it's because we all go through school in one way, shape, or form. And one thing that we're seeing not change is esports growth. I dare you to find a kid that is younger than 10 years old that has not played a game on their iPad or picked up a controller. Some kids don't even know what controllers are anymore because it's all touch screens. So it's one of those cases where we're just going to see this big industrial giant get larger and larger and larger. Another piece of that is in 5 years, looking a little bit outside of collegiate, but definitely informs collegiate esports, is the broader esports ecosystem. Right now, we're living the pop of the bubble. The esports economy is down further than it's been in the last 15 to 20 years. So in the next 5 years, we're going to start to see a rebuilding of that industry and a rebuilding of that infrastructure based on the students that Cora and myself are currently putting out in the industry to go and work and develop that next step. Huge shout out to Chris Postel, one of the leaders in the space right now that is taking that by the bootstraps and making it what it is. So in 5 years, that's where I see we're going to start to see that development. We're going to see collegiate esports really start to section out different markets within itself, and schools take more of a planted flag approach on, we are an academic esports school, or we are a competitive esports school, or we support our community initiatives, or we're an event-centered school. I think we're going to start to see more of those niches populated rather than a one-stop shop.
That's great, Chase. Good stuff. And Cora, I would ask you to conclude the part before we get to whatever time we have left for Q&A with a perspective on this as well. But also, you did such a great job at CECC covering the exciting national championship match in Rocket League down to Game 7. Do you think that excitement will ever transfer to real differences in overall school enrollment beyond just adding the esports students?
Yeah, and actually, I was thinking ahead to Chase's answer as well, and looking at what he said, and I really agree as well with the stratification in the space. And something that Chase knows I write on a lot is how we as a space can't keep living on all worlds. Every program, just like in athletics, will need to differentiate roles and positions, because a director shouldn't also be facilities, shouldn't also be coaching, shouldn't also be marketing, shouldn't also be recruiting. It's not a one-stop shop, and asking that from someone for many positions a part-time role is really hard. So we will see this stratification further with staff who are students we're teaching today, who will realize that this isn't how this industry should be. Here's how we can change it. And I think change is really the big thing for esports, is because we're an industry who moves at a breakneck pace. Things have already gotten markedly different from when I started in esports in 2018. It just keeps getting and more different, and it really comes down to what people want it to be. I know for what I want my program to be, but I also know that I have to align it with administration and that kind of thing. So schools will start picking what they want out of their program. If you just want to bring numbers in, you can be like every D3 college football team. If you want to actually retain folks, you look at individual focus. If you want to like, we've seen great examples of event and broadcast from Boise. We've seen competitive success from so many teams. We've seen some programs focus really on student experience and clubs on campus. It's really what schools want it to be. And I think that schools will start realizing that they don't have to do everything, because they also can't. You're no longer big fish, small pond. You're no longer one of 10 schools offering a scholarship. You're one of 300. And it's really looking at metrics and determining where you want to lie in that. Furthermore, I also think that esports in 5 years really looks at student experience as a blend of college experience, because I think early collegiate esports is very much marked by programs that were trying to be an esports organization that just happened to have a college name attached to it, versus a academic esports program where it's not requiring you to teach, but it's requiring you to be a member of campus. Everyone's an educator in their role every day on a college campus. Everyone is an advocate. Everyone is a learner. Everyone needs to understand that as these three roles and what you do in higher education, you need to be a part of campus, not try to be a separate entity from it. If you're trying to go pro and do all that kind of fun stuff, sure. But for a majority of campuses and a majority of programs, you have to blend with school and be a part of it, get involved in campus initiatives, have staff show their face around campus, do things for the greater good on campus. It's all down to just making sure you're part of campus.
Awesome. Great stuff. Let's go to the audience for some Q&A. Do we have any questions coming from the audience, from any of the folks watching this terrific event, for anybody on the panel specifically or in general? Any questions? Any closing remarks that anybody would like to make? I just want to thank this incredibly distinguished group that comes at this amazing ecosystem from so many different places. Really want to thank everybody for all of your outstanding insights and perspectives. And anybody has any desire to reach some of the folks on the panel, please do so, and we will get you connected with all of the right people. Thank you so much, and thanks, panel, for your time doing this. And look forward to the next panel at 4 p.m. on D1, hosted by the aforementioned Chris Postel.
All righty, everybody. And thank you so much for tuning in today for our discussions at the EsportsU Coaches and Directors Summit this year. Every year we do our Coaches and Directors Summit during the back to school season so that we can have conversations with leaders and individuals within the community about topics that are important to us and important to you. And today we are going to round out our Wednesday panel session with a conversation about Division One in esports and what does that mean. And I am joined by three wonderful veterans of the Scholastic esports ecosystem that just so also happen to be directors at Division One schools. So without further ado, let's in alphabetical order, first name alphabetical order, please. Let's introduce ourselves to the Twitch chat and the world. Take a minute to talk about yourself. What school are you with? What's your role? And we are going to dive into this, my friends.
All right, well, I'll go first. My name is Cody Elson. I'm the esports program director at North Carolina State University. Been here about 10 months or so, so still kind of new to the role, but I was previously at Northwood for about 6 years. My biggest projects here are kind of like developing the program, number one, but also we're building out a full-scale esports arena that'll be about 12,000 square feet that'll be online in a couple of years.
All righty, awesome. And next after that, I believe, is John.
Yeah, if my alphabet song is right, I think that's correct. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. John Price. I'm the esports manager here at The Ohio State University. I just celebrated my 2 years here, and before that, I was at a small liberal arts college in Arkansas at Henderson State University. I've been in the esports industry in one way or another for about 12 years, and since I've gotten here to Ohio State, we've done a few fun things, but probably one of my favorite achievements so far is the co-founding the BEC conference and putting on the first LAN for that back in April here. We had a little over 200 plus participants from 13 different Big Ten institutions on campus, and a lot of fun. And I'm really excited to be here today.
Thank you so much, John, and we're happy to have you. And rounding us out, neat man who needs no introduction, but nevertheless, please tell the world who you are, sir.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Chris and Esports Foundry, for having me. John and Cody, really appreciate it. My name is Sergio, and I am the current director of esports at the University of Maryland in College Park. Before that, I was directing at Ottawa University in Ottawa, Kansas. Also co-founded the CCL with a lot of my peers during my undergrad as a student, actually. And then also currently the VP of Voice. I'm the voice of intercollegiate esports with some very, very talented people. And we're excited to bring some more projects to the forefront, even with Chris here pretty soon. So thanks, everybody, for having me.
All righty, and thank you all so much for being here. We are going to get right into it, and my goal for this discussion today is to help educate the industry ourselves, to break down some of those walls of mystique and questions that surround the difference between Division One schools, and let's just have a real conversation about mission and value and purpose and all of those things that are the same or perhaps different with every other program in the country here. So I want to go around the room and let's go alphabetical in, starting with Cody here, and let's just get the room ready, dispel some of these assumptions. What department does your program live under? And what would you say your main priorities as an esports director are as your administration defines them? So let's just set a baseline. What's your department? What are your main priorities as your administration deems them so? And let's start from there.
So I am within the library system at NC State. We have, I think, 3 or 4 libraries on campus. And the libraries program here is very robust with technology. So that's why they've taken the point on esports. From a priority standpoint, for me right now, it's definitely getting the facilities ready for what we want to do. We just opened our first facility back in January, and we have another, a large arena being built, and then we have 2 semi-truck units being built as well. So it's seeing over those projects. But honestly, like
the community aspect is something we're focusing heavily on in the first couple of years. We have over 1,000 students in our club. If you break that down into other clubs, it's about 1,200 students that are esports are gaining out of our 37,000 students. It's a very high percentage of our population, and it's working with them, putting on events for them. And then the third thing is strategic branding. That's a word that's not brought up enough in the space in general. With like the power of being at a D1 school, we are working on collaborating with the biggest brands possible. We just did some with Manchester City, and we got a couple other big ones as well this fall. And so it's positioning ourselves with high-level brands that aren't necessarily endemic to esports, which helps better connect us within the university and the population of the state we're in. So yeah, that's the main priorities at the moment.
Thank you. Dr. Price, you're up next.
Oh, perfect. So we're in the Office of Student Life and specifically in recreational sports here at The Ohio State University. And our primarily goal, at least that I've kind of given on high and the like, is really student engagement. And for us, that is the kind of ways we look at that as a, from a quantitative standpoint. That is people in our space in our facility. We have about a 4,200 square foot esports arena. And it's also through some of our different programs. That is our premier teams, which is our competitive side, but that's also through things such as professional development. It's through running a variety of different community events or what have you. And so really the emphasis we have is very similar to Cody, and I imagine Sergio is going to have a similar answer as well, but that's why we're here, right? And the last aspect that we're continuing to work on is community develop outside of just campus. And so working with partners around the state. I'm actually going over to the Nationwide Arena, which is where the home of the Blue Jackets NHL team tomorrow to meet with them about doing an esports night sometime in the middle of the hockey season, early Q1 next year kind of aspect, right? So it's trying to make those connections, building out and really exposing people to what esports is, using the brand that is the Ohio State. So it kind of gives you an idea of what we're working on.
All right. Sergio.
Yeah, so at UMD, much similar to Ohio State, we are in the Department of Recreational Wellness and the Division of Student Affairs. That's allowed us to really live out our mission of bringing more students to the forefront of esports, bringing more students into understanding the opportunities that come with esports beyond the competitive side of things. And we typically do that by going through 3 C's, we like to call them in our program. And the first one is creation. And so we have a very robust, very fortunate to have a student staffing structure that allows us to have students in a multitude of creative roles, including videography, photography, video editing, all these different things. And so a lot of the content that you see come out of us is completely curated by our students. And they're being paid to do so. A lot of these students have ended up changing their majors because they took a position with us and understand the opportunities that could possibly come with that afterwards. And that's been a big thing for us. So we really look to enrich our students through creation. Connection is the next one, of course. At the grassroots of it, right? This all started because of community on all these campuses. And so we want to make sure that we're continuing to do so, engaging as best as we can with our clubs, like Cody said earlier, but then also outside of our UMD ecosystem, working with high schools, taking our students to go and coach some high school students or just spending an afternoon with them. We had an after school program for 2 years when we first started the program for underserved communities and underserved schools that didn't have them at their own institutions. And so that has been a big proponent for us. And then lastly, of course, competition. I think we all like winning to some extent. And so, but I even think we approach competition even beyond just that, right? And, I always tell people that our aim is not to just make good players, is to make the best students and the best people possible through competition. And so a lot of that is promoting inclusivity with our players and, not having tolerance for different things that happen in this space, holding them accountable when they don't show up to practices, when they miss different activities, when their grades aren't what they're supposed to be. And then also, from a standpoint of investing even in our coaches, right? Investing in coaches that are not only skilled, but also hold that same value that we have and the same missions that we have. So those are our 3 that we really stick to, and we try to do, we try to reflect everything we do within our program within those 3 C's.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen, for giving a good introduction. And hopefully people learn some things about where your programs are located that may not have been their previous assumption. Sergio, I want to start with you with a individual question. You've been at multiple programs before now during your career. And what about those experiences have helped either influence or evolve the ideas that you've had about what your program is supposed to do and what your program can do?
So I think for me, one of the things I've always appreciated about the experiences that I've been able to gather so far is simply that every single institution I've been at has been a difference in resources, a difference in placement. So starting with my time as a student leader at Ole Miss, right, and being an advocate, really just at the time, right, and a representative of the student body, I thought was very, very important. I also think that it showed me a lot in terms of, um, having empathy towards the student voice. I think a lot of times we're in a space right now where league operators and directors are making majority of the decisions, when in actuality the students are the ones that are affected the most by it. And so that's always made me a big proponent of hearing my students' voices, all the way from big things at our institution, like, hey, what do you think about this facility thing we're looking at, right? And getting a scope of the student body and the pulse of what they feel, but also even small things like, hey, this is a jersey design we're looking at this year. Do you have any pointers for that? So I think my experience as a student has always helped me in that aspect. I think later on, being in a program that was located in athletics versus one now that's in student affairs has really shown me the difference in how different institutions prioritize esports and prioritize the students that are within it. And so I really have enjoyed being able to focus in this new role on just actual programming, career development, helping students find their way, and not just being a number on a scholarship and competing for us. And so being able to focus more on that programming has been something that I think has differentiated from other experiences I've had. It's been so enriching and thrilling for me. But I ultimately think that all of those really come together to help shape how I feel just about student engagement and getting them involved with us. How I feel about scholarshiping in this space, and what is ethical and what isn't. But then also from a standpoint of being in student affairs now, understanding that esports should be holistic on every campus, whether it be integrations with academics, working with external brands like Cody said, alumni activations, all these different things that you should be doing as a program. I think it's just opened up for me immensely in terms of what esports should be, especially on our campus specifically.
Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. Cody, I'm going to turn this over to you here. You are acclaimed as one of the winningest directors in esports, and you are going to run it back, and you're building something brand new over at NCSU. Coming from having built Northwood, what's been the biggest difference between the two experiences that you've had, and what have you enjoyed the most about this transition?
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of polar opposite in terms of the two schools, with the focus on number one, recruitment and enrollment. I think we had over 40,000 applications for this fall alone to NC State for first time undergrad. And, I think we only have capacity for like 6,000. So there's not really an enrollment pressure. It's more of a community and student engagement pressure here. Um, and what probably blew my mind the most was over 4.5 months of our facility being open with 35 computers. We've had 10,000 uses of our facility by students, which is incredible. And I'd say it's like 80 to 90% recreational gaming, and over 200 different games being played, which is definitely not something I expected. I definitely thought there'd be more esports titles involved for sure, but it's incredible to see that, and that difference is really impactful, because when you see that data, you kind of can really see where the university's at. And like John had mentioned, the student engagement piece is really impactful. That wasn't really a big focus or requirement at Northwood. It was more recruit, win, recruit, win. That was the focus. That's definitely not it here. And also, the collaborations are incredible, and and having some of the best professors in the country here, and having them use games like Cyberpunk in my lab to teach about futuristic environments and societies and what that can look like. That's what's the coolest thing here, and I think that's the biggest difference is this program is much more connected throughout the entire university, and the research triangle around Raleigh as well, compared to being kind of niche at a private school and just focusing on that recruitment and enrollment standpoint. And now there's nothing wrong with the recruitment enrollment piece. Private schools are trying to do what they need to do, which is bring in students, and I can't fault them for that. But this is definitely a total different environment for me. And we definitely will build, those championship teams we had at Northwood here at NC State at some point. It's just probably the fourth focus out of the four focuses that we've identified for the program, which are careers, community, collaboration, and competition. It's kind of the last right now, to be honest. But it's been great. The differences have been really impactful, and I think the data kind of says it all. The difference. You have the whole student body, not the whole student body, but such a large percentage of the student body using the space is crazy. But that's kind of the biggest difference. Enrollment pressure, no enrollment pressure for me.
That's incredible. And congratulations on such an impressive use case right off the gate. That is validating, and we love that for you. Dr. Price, I got to ask the question, since you even mentioned it in your introduction. The Ohio State University is one of the founding members of the Big Esports Conference, kicked off last school year to great acclaim, in my opinion. But tell us from your perspective, why was it created and what is it hoping to achieve this year? Are you just a conference? Are you trying to be more than that? Let us know.
Great question, Chris. I think the real thing that the Big Esports Conference is trying to do is support the growth of esports and legitimization of the activity at these Big Ten institutions. If you look at the numbers, the fact of the matter is the vast majority of these schools still do not have either official recognition or they have little to no support, even if they do have recognition. And so part of the conversations we had when we first started the conference was, one, we just wanted to play each other, like simple as that. Like we knew similar schools, institutions that competing against one another would be great for our students, would be exciting, and it would help provide legitimacy to a lot of the programs that are still fledgling, that might not even have facilities or are still kind of just working as student organizations just in general. And I think this year, one of the biggest things we're really trying to do is give back to those groups and such. And having this competition, having LAN events, having rivalry events and such that I know Sergio and I actually worked last year for homecoming. We were playing Maryland here, and we actually kind of had just a fun few days of streams with graphics and everything else. A lot of fun, great opportunity for our students to work on variety of different things, but it's really hoping to try to provide a template for other institutions, either our same size or really any size, to take some of the concepts that we're trying and hopefully make something with them, right? At the end of the day, it's all about just elevating the activity and helping other programs get off the ground. And I already know that there are conversations like Purdue now has their Alienware facility that just came online. I know others in the area are also starting to have more conversations. And some of that has happened because of being able to go to like the esports LAN that we hosted here in Columbus back in April, but also just those competitions. And so end of the day, I think that's kind of the difference between what the Big Esports Conference is compared to some of the other organizing bodies out there. I think they're all trying to do the same thing in elevating the activity. We're just doing it specifically with these institutions and trying to provide support to a lot of startup student organizations and hopefully get them the resources they deserve.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you for the clarity and sharing that with the community here. We're going to jump right into one of the controversial topics of this past summer surrounding D1s, which is the integration question. Historically, we've really had no such thing as an integration conversation because we've all been playing in open registration competition. This year, that seems to be changing. So from each of your perspectives as it pertains to your school's perspective. Tell me, do you think, or why or how Division Ones should either interact or integrate? Does there have to be a discussion, or what does that discussion look like from your school's perspective? And I'm going to play this in reverse order. Let's go with Sergio first and then work our way back.
Yeah, so I think at UMD, I think the boring answer is honestly a lot of our attitudes on this topic come from our students. It also comes from our dedication to serving the larger esports and gaming community on campus. But then it also has relation with donor and alumni engagement, right? And so for us, I think, I don't see the value yet in the D1 leagues that I've gotten with, including the BEC. Love it to death. We had a great experience. For us to completely break off from national competition just yet, I don't see the value there just yet. And our students agree. We do a survey at the end of the year, every year, for our players and our student staff to ask questions all the way from, hey, do you like how you were scheduled, to, hey, do you like the leagues that we chose to play in this year? And within that, we saw that there was a lot of value in still being able to utilize leagues that allow us to have multiple teams, because then we can say, hey, club who doesn't have resources to pay these league fees and also has titles that we don't intercept within our own program, hey, we pay this membership, utilize this, and still have a chance to compete in these leagues, right? And that's something we really are not ready to take away, I think, from our student body yet, right? We don't have that opportunity in a lot of these Division I leagues. I think on the flip side of that, though, if I can cheat and give a yes and answer, yes, but I think that, the rumors are unfortunately true for those that doubt them. Just genuinely, if we beat Syracuse or Michigan State, that's naturally going to mean more to my administration than it is to go against some of the smaller institutions around the country right now. I don't think that Division I directors are making this up. I think we, talk to our administrators regularly, and that is definitely the case. But I also understand that, for some of those smaller schools, playing against schools like us is also a form of enrichment, right? And where they can go and talk to their administrations, just like I did when I was at Ottawa going against, Division I schools. So I think overall for us, like I said, it's really a case of we're never going to completely separate ourselves from national competition as long as our students are still enjoying it and we still have the structure that benefits from competing in those. But we definitely do see the value in competing against our Division I peers in our administration. One of the first times my director in the Department of Recreation and Wellness came and asked me a serious question about esports was when we attended the BEC conference and our Overwatch team won the championship that year. And that was the first time he'd ever mentioned it, because he said, oh yeah, I saw that you all went against Michigan. Heck yeah, like you beat Michigan. That's really cool, right? And that stuff just unfortunately doesn't happen in our regular season play on the national level. And so I think the value's still there. So as long as our students want it and as long as it fits our program structure, that's where we'll be at.
Excellent. Let's run it to Dr. Price.
Well, I'll try not to be a broken record, but Sergio honestly hit pretty much everything I'd be saying on the same point. At the end of the day, I think I'd have a riot on my hands if I said we're only doing D1 competitions just because my players are hyper competitive, and we have plenty of club teams that participate in other conferences outside of what we do in D1 competition, which itself we could have a conversation about whether or not we should even keep calling it that. But I think that really brings up an important point. I don't know of a director that's at one of these large institutions that I've talked to of where the idea is they want to take their ball and just completely go home. I don't know anyone. Some of the things that we talked about, like how playing against other D1 institutions, that is something that our administration does see, but that's not our primary driving factor for the decisions we're making. Not even close. It's all about providing competition for our students, providing opportunities. Like great example, the NECC, we participated in that last year. We paid the extra fee so that our teams that aren't technically premier teams, they're student club teams on campus, can get those resources so we can make it so they don't have to spend money that they would otherwise have to fundraise to go travel to LAN events and such. It's exactly that. We're just trying to provide as much as we can to our student population so that they can engage in the activity they love, and for us to support them in whatever ways that might be. And so that's one of the things whenever I see these conversations online about what's going on with D1 and the kind of schism that's created, it's I kind of look a little bit befuddled because I don't really feel like there is one. Like, I don't think anyone's claiming that we're the quote unquote national champions if you win the BEC championship. Not at all. End of the day, we still compete in the rest of those. We still compete in CLOL, we still compete in CVAL, and we'll still be competing in all those other competitions as well because we want to compete against the best as well. But there are just some benefits for our programs when we also compete in things like the BEC. So, yeah, those are my 2 cents.
Well, we take those 2 cents and we'll bank them for sure. Cody, NCSU's perspectives.
I mean, we're not involved in any of those right now. And part of that reason is we've been invited to some stuff like that was very exclusive, and our students were heavily against it just because, not that they don't want to play against those schools, they don't see the value, but it depends on what the player really wants. So, like, if a player is really trying to get, if a team is like, we want to play the best of the best all the time, and we're going to focus on non-collegiate events and one college league, that's a situation like we're running into here with one of our top teams, right? So it just depends on what the students really want. Honestly, if they're trying to develop as players to get better, like, they're going to do what's best for them. And as directors, you kind of got to support that. I will be somewhat controversial for a second because I've been a good boy for a while, but I do question some of the conferences that have formed that have. I feel like some of the D1 programs that have very, very good competitive teams have not been invited into it. This is not referring to the Big Ten conference or anything, but I do find it weird that some of the established D1 programs that have very good teams are not getting invited to those. And then there's others in there that I've never even seen do anything. So I think there's a little bit of 80 to 90% true intention for the students and 10% of people trying to make things look a little bit different than they are. And that is just the truth and me being brutally honest, how I feel. And I get it. And I will say this from a NC State perspective, 100% they're going to support the D1 conferences, and they love it because they like to play their rivals and they love to play schools they're familiar with. 100% it's going to happen. And I think my answer is kind of a hybrid of John and Sergio's. Like, hell yeah, if there was an ACC one, we'd be participating in that. 100% we would be participating in it because it's our schools that, like, we play against and our student base understands and our fans understand, right? But at the same time, though, we're going to be doing exactly what Sergio was saying. We're still going to play in CLOL, and John was saying CLOL, CVAL. You're still going to play in all those because you got to, right? I just don't think any of the. I think there's a misconception of, like, I don't think D1 schools right now are trying to be like, oh, this is the best conference and we're the best team if we win this conference. I haven't seen a single one claim that. So I think that's a common misconception, right? I think it's just like both sides I can see where they're talking about. We all know internally what schools are the best at what games. It is what it is, right? But it doesn't mean that we should, not be supportive of schools within their conferences that are familiar with playing each other. It's just, as long as those schools aren't saying anything or doing anything disingenuous, I don't see the issue with it. I just think the selection process of the open ones have been interesting. The D1 open ones, not like the ones that are specific to an athletic conference. That's all. But yeah, that's kind of my 2 sides. But 100%, if there was like an ACC one, NC State would be 100% in there, I'm sure, participating and wanting to be in there. Our students would want that. It's fun too, because, like, y'all don't know this, but there's almost over 100,000 students enrolled in Wake County, a 30-mile triangle around Raleigh between UNC, Duke, NC State, Wake Tech, all within like this 30-mile radius where I'm at. They definitely want to play each other and things. That's all I have to say. They're very competitive with each other.
Well,
So
I think I appreciate you for not being a good boy and opening dark, Cody, so to speak. And I want to hear more of those takes.
I don't think it was that bad. I think it was a legit answer. I think it was tame. I think it was just.
No, I think
I see the sides of both sides.
That's all. No, I want to hear the hot takes from you. And in fact, I'm going to toss you another question because I think NCSU is a good example of a D1 school that has buy-in. and it's a new program,
Yeah.
which means you've got that honeymoon phase support from the administration, and that means you get to see firsthand what those trends are coming down the pipeline. So tell us, what do you think is coming to large state schools such as NCSU? Do you think anyone else is leading the way? Do you think there's any directions that you think others will follow in the few years? Just peel the curtain a little bit. Show us what you can.
I think each school has to approach it differently based on where they're located geographically, of the way you look at it. From NC State standpoint, I'm 100% spoiled with what the legislature here is doing. They're investing in esports, reoccurring funds to some schools across the state for arenas and staffs. We personally, $12 million for arena from the legislature, $4 million to build out mobile semi truck units for outreach. The legislature's all in. You have a big city like Raleigh with the legislature giving, up to 25% rebates back on event costs. Like there's going to be a lot of, if it's what's happening with me, there's going to be a lot of more events that are looking to utilize college facilities, college arenas, college stadiums in the future across North America. And as programs continue to pop up at these schools and the directors in place look to put these other facilities online, whether it's conference centers, no matter what it is, you're going to start seeing more and more events that aren't collegiate specific hosted at these events. I'm in a really unique situation in North Carolina where the legislature is so much behind it. And, we have like 6 schools right now that have gotten investments from the legislature to build out programs. And once we all kind of get going in the next couple of years, I think all eyes are kind of going to be on North Carolina, not just from a college standpoint, but from an industry standpoint as well.
All right. Well, you mentioned legislature. I think I counted 27,000 times in that response, and that's something that nobody's talked about much at all this summer.
Yeah, it was intentional. That was intentional. Just so you know, I'm hoping people watching this or go research their local legislative people, because all this took in North Carolina was one person in the legislature to be supportive, to understand it, and to explain it to other people within the legislature of how funding public universities can make a good economic impact and career development and everything. I mean, literally, it just takes one person, but a lot of times it can't be us. It's learning who in that university can reach out to that person. I can tell you right now, there's someone within your university that can connect you to somebody there for sure. So that it's just, it's intentional why I use that word so many times.
The takeaway here is everybody go to your directory, search government relations, and have lunch with that person starting next week. Sergio, I'm going to toss this one over to you next. I've got a question for you. You sit in a pretty unique spot here. You're involved in and have been involved in the past in a lot of conference operations, a lot of discussions. You have a lot of visibility into many of the groups that are involved in our scholastic ecosystem. And I want to ask you, in regards to what you're seeing happen, what are you observing D1s doing that other schools just flat out aren't able to do or are not doing at this time? What are you seeing that is different?
Yeah, so I think for me, I immediately think about 3 things. I think just based on my experience at my last institution, like I said, being in athletics, at a smaller NAIA school in comparison to being at UMD with the student body that we have. And I think number one, I think is the amount of campus partners that you can leverage and build relationships with. I'll never forget one of my first days within this position. I got a call from our development office, and they sat with me and went through a whole sheet of like potential partners and donors that have relations to the university already, and have a specific interest in tech and student development and all these things that we held dear within our program. That was something I can assure you I probably never would have gotten at a smaller institution. And I think just the amount of reach that these schools have in terms of brands, like Cody said earlier, either endemic or non-endemic to esports, is absolutely incredible. It's been a huge help. And I wish more smaller schools had resources like that in their institutions. I think alumni activations is something that we've talked about a good bit on this panel so far. And I just think the amount of alumni that, once again, are both endemic and non-endemic to esports, the amount of times we've gotten alumni say, hey, I got this funded by the university and college to do research for it, and now I've actually built out the product. We want to work with you all, right? Because I love UMD and I love the school I went to. And so just being able to have just the sheer amount of alumni that we can possibly reach out to and from, and just having so many other departments and program areas to learn from in terms of how they engage with their alumni on this campus has been super valuable. And I think the last thing for me is really just how you're able to mesh into your own department's policies and procedures. I think, like Cody said earlier, a lot of times at these smaller schools, it feels like esports is sort of siloed or shoehorned into its own thing. And that can't be further from what esports is, at least at our institution. And so I think, joining recreation and wellness, we were able to see really the good and bad of being able to mesh into those policies and procedures, right? Because on the good half, for example, coming into this role in this department, student staffing was a no-brainer. They knew like that's the custom within our whole department. We want you to have student staff. We want you to be able to focus on career development and building your students in that way. I think on the flip side of that, on a bad portion of it would be, right, you look at something like, let's say, club sports, and all of their coaches in our department are typically volunteers that come from the general campus ecosystem. So faculty, staff that coach some of these sports. So I had to come in and say, hey, this is a little bit different. This is esports. This is why we need to pay our coaches. These are the benefits that we will see from it. And so there's a little bit of a double-edged sword, like I said, with the meshing part, but I definitely think it's a lot easier being able to do so and already having a culture and practices when you sort of come into it. And I think to add, sorry, Chris, I know you asked me for things that D1s do that smaller schools can't do, but I also think there's a lot of things that I don't want to say miss about being at a smaller institution, but it's definitely, I think, advantageous. I think number one, I think Cody and John will agree, red tape is huge on these campuses, right? And it makes doing a lot of projects very time consuming. And I think the second piece to that is the slow communication and the communication pipelines you have to go through to make things happen. There's been a few opportunities that we could have had as a program that I have to talk to my marketing person in my department who then doesn't know the answer. So she has to reach out to the next marketing person above her. And then by the time we get back to that, the opportunity has already moved on and things like that. So I think all of those things are things that have been very enriching for me being on a Division I campus so far, and things that I can say are night and day in comparison to when I was at an NAI school.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. John, we're going to ask you, I think, the last question before we move into Q&A. We've got, I believe, if I counted right, 4 questions in the Twitch chat. If anyone wants to add additional questions, we'll do our best to cover as many as we can with the time that we have. So, John, I'm gonna loop this back in context of what a lot sparked this panel topic idea in the beginning. So we've heard a lot of discussion surrounding D1. I'd like to ask you, do you think that what the BEC, for example, has been able to achieve, or the NECC's announcement has represented, and others that are within the space as well, do you see any further changes within our traditional competitions or conferences? And do you think that we are seeing the tip of the spear for changes to come in the long tail? Or do you see this kind of just being a silo pocket that we'll see maybe a few more of, but other than that, no major changes? What's your prediction?
I hope it's the tip of the spear, because I think for the health and sustainability of the activity going forward, it's really the best way we can go. Because when you have these different kind of regional conferences and such, whether that be based on traditional athletic conferences, whether that's just based on size or just connections between it, you get a lot more enthusiastic and excited competition between those. Your student body generally is going to be more interested. And for a long time, we've had these larger organizations and such, which have been great, very important for the activity moving forward. But I think in particular, as we really don't understand where developer conferences and such are still going, like some of those competitions, we all know what I'm talking about when we're discussing there, that's still such a big question. It means we really need to take it into our own hands and start organizing. And the BEC is just an example of that. If our schools got together and it's like, let's start playing. Why not? There's not a barrier. So let's play together and we'll see what comes from it. I'm sure things will change. I think maybe they'll start being more integrated into different ways. Maybe it'll be a system kind of like how Riot does, where you can have essentially partner conferences and that gets seeded into those national conferences or those national competitions / tournaments, almost like a NCAA March Madness kind of aspect, or of course what CECC does with Bay Madness, as they call it. But I think those types of regional and more community-specific conference creation and competitions that follow that are a much more sustainable way going forward, and more importantly, reactive to the community. The problem is when you have some of these really large organizations, as we've seen with take your pick, it's really hard to make decisions. It's really hard to steer ships that large. So when you have a conference that's maybe only 10 schools, 18 schools, it's a lot easier to be a bit more nimble, to add different titles, to provide resources to some of the different areas, to support student clubs or what have you, or a program that's having issues. I think the next few years are going to be particularly telling, because we have a lot of things happening in higher education people don't realize. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, athletics is not going to be the ones that are going to come save us anytime soon. We have to be able to save ourselves before they're going to be willing to buy in, because what people kind of forget, I think part because a lot of people just aren't tuned into the traditional athletic space, is they're going through their own crazy change. Like the fact that now the payment of players happening and aspects of NIL, but also now many players being employees, there is about to be huge cuts across the entirety of athletics and collegiate. That's going to completely shake things up. And it's why I know a lot of departments are just not even going to still be able to entertain adding esports, at least in D1 level, because they're still trying to figure out how the heck they're going to start paying for the next 5-10 years of their current programs. And a lot of them, the answer is cuts. So we have this weird situation of where not only is it our industry that's still kind of going and iterating and trying to figure this out, but the industry that a lot of people kind of hope would come and save us, have those different scholarships, have that kind of official recognition of brands or what have you, they're also a bit busy. And so the only way that's going to happen, where we have those partnerships really start establishing, is if we can create our own model of success and sustainability, instead of trying to just hope someone else throws us a life preserver and for us to hang on. So I think us creating these conferences and the like and working together is a much more sustainable path to the future until some other plan comes around. End of the day, we're all just trying to figure out what's going to work, what's going to last the next 5, 10, 20 years. And so far, I think this is the best idea that I've seen come out for a bit.
Well, thank you for that hot take. And I appreciate it. That was well presented and well articulated. So kudos to all of you. We are currently at the 46-minute mark. I want to take some time to answer some questions from the chat. And the first question, I will say, is open to anybody to take it who wants it. So this is an open ball. You guys can rush at it as you wish. And the question is from Silingi in Twitch chat. I hope I got your name pronounced properly. Being D1 schools and having access to larger athletic teams and programs, do you see traditional sports games being able to connect more with your campus population?
Yeah, I'll go.
Say,
So
go ahead, Cody.
Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say we just did a collaboration with Manchester City. Had our soccer team involved on that. I can't. There's one. Doing stuff with football as well for a pretty large game, September 7th. That'll have an esports element to it at the game, Tennessee versus NC State. So yeah, that obviously has helped, and then something with baseball potentially as well. That's pretty big in October. Yeah, it definitely is the case. People love sports games here. Our number one played game in the lab is FIFA. Like college football has been crazy hot since it came out in our lab. Madden's crazy hot. Yeah, there's a lot of sports games being played, 100%. And having successful athletics teams has definitely helped push that for me at least. When we were in the Final Four for basketball, 2K spiked in the lab. Like literally, like it just you can see the data. It'll show you if you look at it. I'm lucky that NC State is very, very particular about capturing every piece of data possible, and then being able to spot trends in our own facilities. And yeah, athletics is making a big. The football team uses our esports lab on the recruiting trips now. They bring the recruits there every time. Like it's a big thing for sure.
Anyone else want to add on to that?
No, I think I'll just say that I think this is something I've been screaming at the rooftops for a very long time, that there's no reason sports games shouldn't be some of the pinnacle of what we have within this space. I think you look at all of our campuses, even the smaller ones, a majority of students are probably playing some sort of sports games, with NCAA football coming out and with Madden being out, 2K, there's so many different opportunities, and the games are just so much more accessible than I think some of the titles that we still continue to uplift after all these years. And so I'm excited that more students are playing them. I'm excited that more athletic departments, like Cody said, are starting to collaborate with us on programming and things like that for those games. But I also think that it's overdue, that we definitely need more opportunities for students to be able to play and compete at a high level in these titles.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. The next question is from a regular of ours, Hispanic Phenom. What kind of professional development do you guys think a program director or a coordinator can do to better prepare for, I'm assuming, their own transition into a D1 school? So to restate, what can we do to get people into more D1s? What skill set do they need?
I mean, like for me, like I'll go first real quick. Like I don't see directors really coming up with a strategic vision, mission, long-term plan, 5-year plan, 10-year plan that they can present. That's what D1 schools are going to want to see. How we're going to do it, why we're doing it, and why we're doing it, how we're going to do it, and how we're going to get there. Like they want to know these things in advance, and they're really willing to work with people if you can give them a runway. That, and then really study the issues with being at a public nonprofit, with how things work, with where money's spent, how you can spend it, how a facility can be used, depending on how it's funded. It'll save you a lot of time by researching how that works, working for a state government essentially. Those are my two biggest things for sure. Anyway, any opportunities to learn about that, definitely take advantage of those.
100%
One thing I had to
agree.
add from that.
Go for it.
Yes, sorry, Chris. So I was a professor before I took on this full-time role and such. So I came from the academic side of things. And when you're going to a D1, understanding kind of just like what Cody says is how these massive organizations fund themselves is really important, because that's going to determine a lot about where priorities are and such. So like when you're at a D1, D2, esports really is fulfilling much more of a recruitment role. It's that aspect where when you're at a D1, because of just its size and implications of that, you're much more on that engagement. You're on that research side of things. You're on the academic side of things. You're on the creation of that community aspect. And of course, the alumni base that comes with it, right? If you can understand that and articulate that in your conversation, especially like during that interview process, that's the wordage, the nomenclature you need to have in order to convince those admins that okay, this is somebody that gets it, that understands where they fit in this larger piece of the puzzle, because you are a small cog in a massive machine, regardless of what your institution you're at. And you need to understand what other gears your organization, that small esports program, is turning when it's working. Because if you don't, you're going to find out somebody else out there is now all of a sudden gunning for you because you didn't understand the landscape that you're walking into. I know my first 6 months here was literally just figuring out what the heck happened over the last 4 years when they built the facility here back all the way in 2019. And because if you just start kind of going off and, just implementing your vision without really understanding it, you can easily all of a sudden make your life a lot harder, and in turn, not just affect yourself, but harm your students and what they're trying to do, because all of a sudden this program you're trying to develop now has hit a roadblock, not because of just a lack of ignorance. And that's something really to consider. Like, if you haven't really researched what is an R1, what does that even mean? How did they get it? How did that build around? You're missing a key part of that puzzle in order to be able to get into a position like this. And while those administrators might not understand what esports is, they might think Twitch is a YouTube channel or something, or Discord is something that's akin to Instagram. They'll understand when you're able to talk about those long-term 5-10-year plans, how to create sustainability, how to interact and engage with student populations to develop an internship aspect. If you can speak that language, you now have a leg up over so many others. And especially, this industry is just going to get more competitive in the future. And so if you put that time in to go out and learn about the academic side, to learn about how grant writing is done, my God, grant writing alone, that's a big area in itself. So it can be really intimidating, but it's worth the time and it's worth the effort, and it will pay dividends in the future.
All righty. We'll go to the next question by KBot. Even despite not being ready to break off quite yet from national competition, is competing in more than 2 leagues sustainable for students? Take OSU now as an example, competing in the BEC and the PEC. Does it make sense to add a third? So, gentlemen, who wants to take this one?
I'll start. I think for me, I am loving this new trend, and it's very much in its genesis still, but league organizers and tournament operators having semesterly competition. I think that's something in the BEC that we're experimenting with this year, and having certain titles committed to a single semester. And I'm very much looking forward to it, because I do think that once you get into that third league territory, that's when it does start to get hairy. And I really start to question, what are the students getting out of it? Are they even practicing? Are they working together as a team? Or is it just, all right, let's get on for this league match today and tomorrow the next day, and then we don't talk for the rest of that week? So I definitely think it's important. And I really do hope that we start to see more leagues take on the semester league competition approach.
Yeah, and just quick 2 cents here to add on to that. I really think, especially as you're at a D1 institution, academics becomes that much more important. And if you're starting to kind of like do a lot of these competitions and starting to work with academic departments and the like, that's going to be a question that comes up at some point. It might not have been yet. That's probably just because esports still is really growing and trying to figure out its place on these campuses. But when it does, the question of just quality of life for these students, the fact of like their time management, making sure that they are able to complete those degrees, that they are progressing, will be brought up. Like, you don't see this in traditional athletics for good reasons, because, I mean, for them, it's like their bodies literally couldn't take it. But it's the same thing for us as well. It's a little different in the sense it's not as obvious, right? You having somebody play 3 full football games in a week. Yeah, no crap. That's a bad idea. But it really is the same for esports. It's just we're used to playing all the time. We're used to that. We're used to that community. But it really is something we need to challenge in the sense of, if we want to be serious about this, we need to kind of look to what the rest of the activities in the room are doing and take a bit of note from that. It's not going to happen overnight. We all know that. Like, if I tried to say, okay, we're only doing 1 conference, it'd be a rough few weeks for me. But that is where things are going to inevitably go. And as we take things more seriously, as it becomes more mainstream and accepted, that's exactly where the conversations are. And if you're not prepared or can't see that, you're in for a rude awakening once we get to those.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all. We're going to ask, I think, the final question from Mike Mund. Does anyone have any insight on private D1s getting more involved in the national landscape versus large state schools?
You say that again?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll restate it. Does anyone have any insight on private schools, private D1s getting more involved in the national conversation versus large state public schools? Is there a difference between private and public within the D1 ecosystem right now?
I don't think that private D1s, a lot of the ones I know, aren't struggling for students that are D1s and private at the moment. Most of the ones I know. I don't think it's as much of a issue as it is with like D2, D3, NAIA with enrollment at the moment. I think a private D1, like let's say like a Duke, who's down the road from us, would have to see a significant impact on how it can help the well-being of their current student body for them to do anything like that, or if like esports all of a sudden popped off and was recognized by the NCAA or AA or something like that, right? Like it would take like a movement like that to see that. Public D1s, it's a little bit different. Much larger enrollment typically, and retention and engagement is a little bit more of a challenge for us at times because there's so many students to connect to, and a gaming program can or esports program can definitely help with retention. I think that's the big difference between those two.
Yeah, and just trying to think of like what would be a good example of a private D1 that's doing it. I really think the only example, and I might be entirely wrong, I don't know enough traditional athletics. I know a little, but just not enough. I think it's probably Doc at Boise State. I think that's the only program I can think of that's a private D1 that has.
I think Syracuse.
Oh, right. I forgot that they're. Yeah, no,
I think Boise's public
later.
too.
Is it? All right. Well, again, clearly don't follow enough of football for me.
Well, I think Syracuse is an example of where enrollment is down for them. So
we just had our enrollment conversation previously, so I encourage anyone watching this to go onto our YouTube, go to our Twitch, and watch that VOD. I think that was a really interesting conversation. It is currently 5 o'clock, and I get to give the last question to myself. So thank you, Gallocott, for thinking of the panel moderator and including me in the reindeer games. And the question is, what have you noticed as standout trends in the collegiate esports data collection where D1 schools stood out as outliers? Oh, I'm so glad someone asked this question. The majority of D1 schools currently do not live under athletics departments. Some do, but the majority do not. And that's interesting because 44% of all programs live under athletics, and that is not an even split when we're looking, especially on the state state public side of the conversation. The other side of the coin is that the competitive placement of the public D1s in the broader scope of things is not as high proportionally to the smaller D2s or other programs that exist in proportion to their student body. So in years past, when we had a lot of clubs, the ratio is far different. UBC, big powerhouse. Simon Fraser, big powerhouse. UCF, big powerhouse. A lot of those schools, I mean, even Ohio State is a great big powerhouse in Call of Duty and a couple other game titles too. But for what we would consider the top echelon of competitive esports titles, schools that are not offering athletic scholarships do have a disadvantage that has grown greater than the student population gap can natively fill by just rolling the dice and seeing who's radiant at your school, at a school like NCSU or Ohio State. Not saying there's none of them. There's still good population to pick from, and you'll always get a good roster. But can you compete now in a world where schools are offering 5+ full ride scholarships for Valorant? Different story, different time. And that is the outlier trend that we've seen. When the schools start offering scholarships, however, if and when certain programs do that, that will most likely change a lot. Does anyone want to agree or disagree with my take there?
No, I agree with it. Definitely agree with it. 100%. I also think athletics departments don't want to add another sport that's losing money in their eyes. That's how they would see it, because most athletics departments are hemorrhaging money outside of one or two sports or all sports at the moment. So now's not the time you're going to see that migration to athletics, that's for sure.
All righty. Well, we are at time, gentlemen. So thank you so much for your participation, your words of wisdom. I hope everybody watching today has learned a little bit more than they had before. No doubt some of you and us will take this conversation to Twitter at the end of the day, and we'll see what conversations emerge within the greater community. We will resume our final day of the Coaches and Directors Summit tomorrow. So please tune in, stick around, and check us and follow us on EsportsU on Twitter to see the schedule and see what's going on. Follow us, join the Discord, be a part of the community, and most importantly, good luck and have fun in this back to school magical time that is, in my opinion, the most wonderful time of the year. Have a great day, everybody. Enjoy.